What has always been gained from talking about literacy as numbers is that it's a form of the democratic process of the modern state. We began to count, I think, in the first place in order that we might decide how to allocate public finances, and or we might find out whether that investment was being properly made. And to us, both those questions seems to me to be intrinsic to any kind of democratic decision making in a modern polity. So I think that will always be there, and that for as long as we have to invest in the promotion of literacy, whatever we may think literacy is, then we're bound to want to have some kind of quantitative indicators about the scale of need and about the effect of that investment. We're using resources for literacy which could be otherwise applied to other forms of public good or other forms of private consumption, and if we're to divert them into literacy, I think counting is inescapable.
I came to the symposium because I think we need to do more research on the power of numbers and how numbers influence what we know about the world, how policies are shaped, and how governments decide what to do and what not to do.
It's really only with this kind of information that one can have a good idea of the extent to which there is a problem with adult literacy in countries, the extent which groups do and don't have high levels of proficiency in these kind of skills, and really without that kind of information, I mean, governments, policy makers, and even practitioners are more or less in the dark about the dimensions of this skill that we call literacy.
The problem is that if you frame this in terms of different discourses, you can start losing track of the real details of how literacy actually is a social practice, and embedded in the practice of literacy there are hundreds of dimensions of what social life is about, and that's one of the risks. The other risk is that if you frame this in terms of a given political discourse about international competitiveness, you miss the point of what education is about in terms of education as a fundamental human right.
I feel that we have somehow created these divisions between quantitative and qualitative work, and my own research into what is known as quantitative work has shown it to be extremely qualitative. Because every number's got a story. In fact, I remember interviewing somebody recently who said that every number in the, in Education at a Glance, which is the OECD's annual publication, she said that behind every number there's this big story, and that's exactly right. And numbers are made through models and through an imagination of what things are like, and indicators have to be created for things that can't be measured very easily or counted very easily. So you have to kind of take abstract notions like equity, for example, and then give them characteristics that can be measured, or proxies that can stand in for other things that are measurable. And then you measure in that way. And so there's always this notion of qualitative judgments behind all of these numbers. So in fact, John Law has come up with this notion of qualculation, which looks at calculation that is never simply about, data is never self-evident. It's always underpinned by qualitative work.
More and more measurement in numbers are used to evaluate program effectiveness, and so measurement and numbers in terms of evaluation effectiveness, they shape practitioners' lives, and they also keep qualitative researchers on the outside in a way. And I think that there are ways that numbers can be used very effectively to run programs more effectively and to justify funding for programs in a contested policy environment. So my interest is in trying, not in pushing numbers away, but in trying to work out ways that practitioners, policymakers and researchers can work together to use numbers well to improve practice and policy.
I think what's gained by treating literacy as numbers is it simplifies the complexity of literacy in a way that makes it possible to talk about it in a range of different contexts. But that is also part of what gets lost by treating literacy as numbers. Treating it as numbers removes from view all of the context, the social, historical, political context the very particular definitions of what kind of literacy you're talking about. So treating it as numbers creates a very limited view of literacy as the only view.
It seems to me that one of the main issues at this symposium is the issue of purpose. What is one trying to achieve? One of the criticisms of international assessments is that their purpose is to look at not only relationships between, let's say, teacher training and children's literacy or adolescent literacy, but also rankings of national skill levels. And there's been a lot of discussion and criticism of that approach in international assessments. But the issue to me is really, what is the purpose of these assessments? So if the purpose is ranking of countries, then one has to come up with a strategy to do so. On the other hand, if one's approach is to look at creating equity in education, equity in learning, then the issue there is more making sure that the kinds of assessments that are used treat individuals who are marginalized, who have the greatest chance of becoming disadvantaged inside a system, making sure that they are properly represented and properly understood. And current international assessments tend not to do that. That's an expensive enterprise, and one that must be focused on. In other words, it has to be purposefully addressed